The wind howled across the frozen plains of Karen 4. Snow and ice stretched as far as the eye could see, glinting in the weak light of the twin suns. The human settlement was small, built of metal and stone, and the explorer, Kale, had been sent to check the northern fields for damage after a recent storm. He trudged through the snow, boots heavy with frost, scanning the ground for anything unusual. The air was bitter, each breath sharp and cold. Kale wrapped his coat tighter, wishing the twin suns would rise higher and bring warmth. Then, something moved beneath a broken cargo vehicle, a small flicker of color, bright against the white snow. Kale froze. At first, he thought it was a stray animal, but the shape moved with hesitation and intelligence. A pair of tiny, shivering creatures peeked from under the metal, their scales shimmering faintly in pale blue and silver. Kale knelt slowly, careful not to startle them. They were no larger than a rabbit, with tiny wings folded against their sides and eyes wide with fear. One twin curled tightly against the other, trying to share warmth. The cold had taken its toll, their scales were dulled, and their tiny noses twitched as if searching desperately for heat. Kale's heart clenched. Dragons, rare, small and vulnerable. And here, in the middle of the frozen plains, they were alone and unprotected. He crouched a little lower, letting the dragons see his face. "It's okay," he said softly, voice steady but quiet. He did not move his hands yet, letting them watch him. The twins shifted, pressing closer together, their small bodies trembling. Kale could see their fear clearly. They expected him to be a threat. Most humans would not have hesitated to use force, but Kale did not carry weapons. He had only come to help, though he knew that help could be rejected, or worse, misunderstood. Kale slowly unbuttoned his coat, letting the movement be obvious but gentle. The twin dragons blinked, their golden eyes reflecting a glimmer of curiosity. They had never encountered kindness like this in their short lives, or perhaps in the universe at all. Their tiny tails twitched, hesitant, but they did not run. Kale leaned forward, speaking softly. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to help." One of the twins shifted, sniffing the air, unsure. Kale did not move closer. He stayed calm, letting them make the choice to approach. This was important. Any sudden movement could send them into panic. Minutes passed. The wind whipped around them, carrying flakes of snow that melted quickly on Kale's coat. The twins curled even tighter together. Kale realized that their instinct to huddle was their only defense. He understood then that warmth was the most precious gift he could offer, not just physical but emotional. He opened one arm slightly, showing he meant no harm, and lowered himself more to their level. The larger twin twitched its tiny wings nervously. The smaller one pressed its head against its sibling, trembling. Kale smiled gently. "I know it's cold," he whispered. "I can help you." He reached slowly, hand open, toward the snow beside them, letting them see the gesture was not a grab, not a threat. The twins watched. One of them blinked slowly, then took a tiny step forward, curious but cautious. The other stayed still but did not retreat. Kale held his breath. This was the first sign of trust. One small step could mean the difference between safety and panic. Carefully, Kale removed his scarf and laid it in the snow, close enough for the twins to touch but far enough to not seem threatening. The larger twin nudged it with its nose, testing. Kale smiled and spoke softly. "It's warm. You can rest there if you want." The twin settled on the scarf, curling again against its sibling. Kale kept his hands visible, unmoving. Slowly, he unbuttoned his coat more and opened it gently, creating a little shelter from the wind. The twins peeked at the movement, then pressed closer together. Kale felt a small sense of victory. The dragons were not fleeing. They were observing, learning that this human did not bring harm. Hours seemed to pass in silence. Kale stayed near them, letting the wind rush past him instead of the twins. He brought small containers of nutrient gel, placing them nearby, showing that he would not force the food on them. The twins sniffed, and after a moment the larger one nibbled. The smaller one followed. Kale nodded gently. Eating was always a sign of trust. The sun dipped low, and the twins curled under Kale's coat for the first time. They pressed against his chest lightly, tiny claws resting on the fabric but not piercing it. Kale held them carefully, letting their warmth seep through the thick material of his coat. Their breaths were quick but steadying. Their eyes closed slowly as the warmth calmed their shivering. Kale realized that these were not ordinary dragons. They were twins, bonded from birth, relying on each other completely. Their trust in each other had kept them alive so far. His job now was simple: to provide warmth, patience, and care until they felt safe in the wider world. He whispered softly, "You're not alone anymore. I won't let anything happen to you." The wind still whipped across the plains, but for a small patch of snow, the world felt safe. Kale, the human explorer, held the tiny dragon twins against the cold, and for the first time since the storm they let themselves relax. Their scales shimmered faintly, reflecting not just the fading sunlight but the beginning of trust. The moment was fragile. One wrong move could undo everything. Yet in that frozen valley, a bond had been formed. Not through power, not through force, not through fear, but through patience, presence, and kindness. And for the first time in their short lives, the homeless dragon twins felt what it meant to be safe. Kale stayed crouched in the snow, holding the tiny dragon twins close beneath his coat. The wind was still harsh, cutting across the frozen plains, but the warmth of their small bodies pressed against him made the cold easier to bear. The twins' breaths were quick and shallow at first, but slowly they began to relax. Their tiny wings twitched occasionally, uncertain, but they did not try to escape. Kale could feel the tension in their bodies slowly easing. He whispered softly, "It's okay. You're safe. I won't let anything hurt you." The larger twin shifted its head, pressing closer to Kale's chest. Its golden eyes blinked slowly, studying him, trying to understand what he was. The smaller twin remained behind, peeking out cautiously from beneath the coat, its tiny claws gripping the fabric. Kale knew it would take time. Trust was not something they could give immediately. It had to be earned, gently and patiently. Kale moved carefully, keeping his hands visible, open. He offered no sudden gestures. "I'm not here to scare you," he said softly. "I just want to help." The larger twin made a small sound, almost like a soft squeak, and shifted closer. Kale held his breath. That tiny sound was the first sign that it was willing to communicate. Encouraged, he reached slowly into his coat and adjusted the twins so they were both comfortably nestled. The smaller twin tensed at first, but then relaxed slightly, following the example of its sibling. Kale smiled gently. "Good. That's good," he whispered. "See? Nothing to fear." He looked around the frozen valley. The storm had passed, leaving the world quiet and white. No predators, no other creatures, just snow, ice, and the faint shimmer of the twin suns above. It was perfect for them to take their first steps towards safety. Kale's own breath fogged in the cold air, but he ignored it. All that mattered was the fragile trust growing beneath his coat. After a while, Kale carefully lowered himself to sit fully in the snow. The twins followed his movement, curling closer to him for warmth. He spoke softly, telling them about the small shelter he had prepared a short distance away. He had gathered materials during his journey, knowing that some creatures could survive a few minutes in the cold but not hours. He described it gently, pointing to the makeshift structure made of metal and insulated panels. The larger twin tilted its head, curious. It had never seen such a structure before, nor had it likely encountered any human before. The smaller twin sniffed the air, still cautious, but moved a little closer to see. Kale's calm presence seemed to reassure them. "Do you want to see it?" Kale asked softly, though he knew they couldn't answer in words. He reached down slowly and touched the snow near the entrance of the shelter, letting them see he was not trying to grab or force them. The twins peered out from beneath his coat. The larger one stepped forward first, testing the snow with a tiny claw. Kale remained still, waiting patiently. The twin pressed forward, then stopped, looking back at Kale. Its golden eyes were wide, as if asking, "Will you follow? Will you protect us?" Kale nodded gently, though the movement was careful and slow. "I'm right here," he said softly. "You're safe with me." Encouraged, both twins inched toward the shelter. Kale followed, crouching low so as not to intimidate them. They stepped onto the snow-covered metal floor of the small shelter and paused, sniffing the air. Kale waited silently, giving them space to explore. The twins' tails flicked nervously, and their tiny wings twitched as they examined the corners. Kale smiled quietly to himself. Their curiosity was growing, and with it, their trust. After a few minutes, Kale reached into his coat and brought out a small container of nutrient gel. He placed it on the ground near the twins. The larger twin approached cautiously and began nibbling, while the smaller twin watched, still unsure. Kale did not move or speak loudly. He stayed calm and patient. Soon, the smaller twin stepped forward and began to eat as well. That small act, accepting food, was a milestone. It meant they recognized Kale as a source of safety. Kale let out a quiet sigh of relief. "See? You can trust me," he said gently. "Nothing bad will happen." Hours passed and the twins grew more comfortable. They moved around the shelter, exploring every corner while staying close to Kale. Occasionally, the larger twin brushed against him with its head, a gesture Kale recognized as a small sign of affection. The smaller twin mirrored the movement cautiously, learning from its sibling. Kale's heart swelled with warmth, not just from their tiny bodies, but from the realization that trust was being built slowly but surely. As evening approached, Kale spread his coat over the twins to provide extra warmth. They nestled beneath it, curling against each other in his chest. The wind continued to howl outside, but within the small shelter, a quiet peace settled. Kale whispered softly, "You're safe now. You don't have to be alone." The twins closed their eyes, finally allowing themselves to relax. Their tiny breaths grew steady, and Kale felt the fragile bond solidifying. He stroked their small heads carefully, feeling the softness of their scales beneath his fingers. No words were needed, the act itself spoke volumes. In that quiet, frozen valley, trust had begun. Kale knew the journey was only starting. There would be challenges ahead, keeping them safe, teaching them about the world and helping them grow. But the first step had been taken. The twins had accepted him, if only in small ways. They had chosen to trust, and he had chosen to honor that trust. For the first time since finding them, Kale allowed himself a small smile. The world outside was still harsh and cold, but within the shelter warmth and hope thrived. And in that moment, the tiny dragon twins had discovered something as powerful as any fire they might one day breathe: the gentle, steady warmth of kindness. Kale woke before the twin suns rose over the frozen plains. The small shelter was quiet except for the soft, steady breaths of the tiny dragon twins. They were curled beneath his coat, pressed close to each other and to him. Their scales glimmered faintly in the dim light, the pale blue and silver shining like tiny stars. Kale smiled quietly. Last night had been the first full night they had slept without shivering, without fear. He lifted his coat gently, careful not to wake them abruptly. The larger twin peeked up at him with sleepy golden eyes, blinking slowly. The smaller one stirred but stayed close to its sibling. Kale whispered softly, "Good morning. Did you sleep well?" He knew they could not answer with words, but their tiny gestures told him everything. The larger twin nudged him lightly with its tiny nose, and the smaller twin yawned, curling tighter against the warmth. Kale chuckled softly. "All right, little ones. Time to start the day." He reached for a small container of nutrient gel he had prepared the night before. The twins watched him carefully. The larger one stepped forward first, sniffing the container, then tasting it. The smaller twin followed after a moment of hesitation. Kale waited patiently, letting them take their time. The simple act of eating, together and without fear, was a mark of growing trust. After breakfast, Kale carefully moved to make the shelter more comfortable. He laid soft materials on the floor, creating little corners for the twins to explore. He spoke gently as he worked. "See? This is your space. You can explore, play, or rest whenever you like." The twins peeked around, tiny wings flicking nervously. Then, encouraged by their siblings' confidence, they stepped out to inspect the small corners. Kale stayed close but did not reach for them. He had learned that trust could not be forced. It was built in small moments, in shared quiet and gentle presence. The twins moved more freely as the day passed. They began to flap their tiny wings lightly, testing strength, feeling air currents, and learning that Kale's presence was not a threat. The larger twin even ventured to climb a small rock near the shelter, looking back to make sure Kale was still there. Kale crouched low, watching every small movement. "That's it," he whispered softly. "Good job." He smiled as the twins began to interact not only with him but with each other in new ways. They chirped softly, nudged each other with tiny snouts and mirrored movements. Each interaction strengthened their bond, not just with Kale but as a pair. The larger twin seemed protective, while the smaller one was curious but cautious. Kale observed carefully, learning their personalities. As the day grew warmer under the twin suns, Kale decided it was time for a gentle walk. He stepped outside the shelter slowly, the twins following but staying close to him. The snow was still cold, but he led them to a small sunlit patch, letting them feel the warmth of the light. The twins pressed against each other for comfort, but they were no longer hiding. Kale watched them breathe deeply, noticing their tiny tails flicking in curiosity rather than fear. He knelt in the snow, extending a hand gently. The larger twin hesitated for a moment, then stepped closer, letting Kale touch a smooth scale. The smaller twin watched carefully, then joined, nudging his hand with its tiny nose. Kale smiled softly. "You're learning to trust me. I'm proud of you." Even though they did not understand words fully, his tone and calm presence reassured them. Over the following days, Kale worked to create routines. Mornings were for warmth and breakfast, afternoons for gentle exploration, and evenings for resting in his coat. Each day the twins became more comfortable with their surroundings. They began to play in the snow, chasing each other's tiny tails, and occasionally nudging Kale as if inviting him into their games. He joined carefully, letting them lead, celebrating every small victory. Kale also started teaching them small gestures. A chirp or flick of the wing could mean a request or a response. The twins learned quickly, responding to him with small nudges or movements. The larger twin seemed to understand most quickly, encouraging the smaller one to follow. Kale realized that their bond was not just with him, it was with each other, strengthened by shared safety and trust. One evening, as the suns dipped low and the sky turned pale pink, Kale spread his coat wide. The twins snuggled beneath it, resting close to each other and him. Their tiny bodies radiated warmth, and Kale felt the weight of their small lives in his hands. He stroked the larger twin's head carefully, then the smaller one, whispering softly, "You're safe. You're home now, little ones." The twins pressed closer, tiny hearts beating against his chest. For the first time they did not flinch, did not hesitate. They trusted him completely. Kale's heart swelled with a gentle pride. The bond was no longer fragile. It had grown strong, built on patience, warmth, and small gestures repeated every day. Night fell, and the wind outside continued to howl across the plains. But inside the small shelter, the twins slept peacefully, curled together beneath Kale's coat. The quiet, rhythmic breaths of 3 lives, human and dragon, filled the space. Kale lay back, watching the soft rise and fall of their tiny bodies, thinking of how far they had come. He realized that this was more than caring for them. This was building a family born not of blood but of trust, patience, and kindness. Each day, each gentle touch, each shared moment of warmth had deepened their bond. The twins would grow strong and brave, but they would always remember the human who had first offered safety without fear. Kale smiled softly, closing his eyes for a brief rest. Tomorrow would bring more exploration, more learning, and more growth. But for tonight, the bond they had formed was enough. In the cold, frozen valley, a human and 2 tiny dragons had discovered warmth, trust, and a shared sense of home. And with that bond, they would face the world together, stronger than they had ever imagined. The days passed slowly in the frozen valley, each one warmer and calmer than the last. Kale had grown accustomed to caring for the tiny dragon twins. Their scales glimmered brighter, their tiny wings fluttered more confidently, and their eyes shone with curiosity rather than fear. The bond between them had grown strong, but Kale knew that the world outside the shelter was unpredictable. The valley was quiet now, but beyond it, dangers and unknowns waited. One morning, as the suns rose over the horizon, Kale prepared the twins for a short walk outside the shelter. He had built a small harness for each, not to restrain them but to help them explore safely. The twins watched him carefully, wings twitching nervously. Kale knelt in the snow, letting them climb onto his hands gently. "We'll take it slow," he whispered. "Nothing scary will happen." The larger twin stepped first, nudging Kale's palm as if asking permission. The smaller twin followed hesitantly, staying close to its sibling. Kale smiled softly. "Good job. You're being brave." Their tiny bodies were light, but he could feel their energy and excitement. They chirped softly, tiny sounds that made Kale laugh. As they moved farther from the shelter, Kale noticed something in the distance, figures approaching across the snow. Humans from the nearby settlement had come to check on the northern plains after the storm. Kale froze, unsure how the twins would react. The larger twin flinched slightly, curling closer to the smaller one. Kale whispered, "Stay calm. They won't hurt you." The humans stopped a short distance away, clearly surprised to see the dragons. Some took cautious steps forward, while others held their hands up in greeting. Kale knelt in the snow, making himself small and non-threatening. "These twins are safe," he said softly, projecting calm. "They've never been harmed by anyone here." The larger twin tilted its head, watching the humans. The smaller one hid slightly behind its sibling, unsure. Kale encouraged them quietly. "It's okay. You're still safe. I'm here." Slowly the larger twin crept forward, sniffing the air. The humans watched in awe, whispering among themselves. No one made sudden movements. After a few cautious steps, the twins began to explore the area near the shelter. Kale followed, speaking gently, pointing out small details in the snow, shiny icicles, patterns in the frost, and small tracks of animals that had passed during the storm. The twins chirped and flapped their tiny wings, fascinated. They were learning not just about the warmth and safety of Kale's care, but also about the world around them. As they explored, Kale noticed the twins' wings becoming stronger. The larger twin practiced flapping in short bursts, lifting slightly above the snow. The smaller twin tried as well, wobbling but persistent. Kale encouraged them, laughing softly. "That's it. You're learning. Keep trying." Their trust in him had grown enough that they felt confident exploring beyond the shelter. Later that day, Kale led them toward a small frozen stream nearby. The twins were curious but cautious. Kale crouched in the snow, letting them approach the ice carefully. The larger twin tapped the surface with a tiny claw, watching the reflection of the sun. The smaller twin hesitated, then mimicked its sibling. Kale smiled. "Good. You're learning together." The twins chirped in delight, tiny sounds that echoed across the quiet valley. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew harder, sending snowflakes swirling. The twins shivered, curling close to Kale's chest. "It's okay," Kale said calmly. "Nothing will happen. You're safe." He adjusted his coat to cover them more fully, holding them gently against his warmth. The twins relaxed slowly, showing that their trust extended even in the face of sudden change. That evening, Kale returned to the shelter with the twins. Their wings were tired, but their eyes were bright with new discoveries. He prepared a small meal of nutrient gel, and the twins ate quickly, chirping softly between bites. Kale stroked their tiny heads, feeling the bond grow stronger. "You're learning so much," he said. "I'm proud of both of you." Over the next days, Kale began teaching them basic navigation. He encouraged the twins to explore further distances, always staying close but giving them space. The larger twin became bold, venturing onto small rocks and snowbanks, while the smaller twin followed cautiously, learning from its sibling. Each day brought new challenges, icy patches, sudden winds, and unfamiliar sounds, but Kale remained calm, guiding them with patience and steady presence. The humans in the nearby settlement continued to watch from a distance. Some came closer gradually, offering small gifts like soft fabrics and gentle tools for the shelter. Kale welcomed their help, but he always stayed between the twins and the newcomers, ensuring the dragons felt safe. The twins began to recognize the humans as friendly but still relied on Kale as their protector and guide. One afternoon, the larger twin flapped its wings more confidently, lifting a few inches above the snow. The smaller twin tried to imitate, wobbling but determined. Kale cheered softly. "That's it. You can do it." The twins chirped excitedly, their small bodies filled with energy and joy. It was a small but important victory, proof that their confidence was growing under Kale's care. As night fell, Kale spread his coat wide, letting the twins snuggle against him once more. The wind howled outside, but inside the shelter, peace had returned. The twins' tiny breaths were steady, and their wings twitched in dreams of flying and exploring. Kale whispered softly, "Tomorrow we'll go a little farther. You're ready?" He realized that the world outside the shelter was no longer entirely threatening. The twins were learning to navigate challenges, to face new sights and sounds with courage. And through it all, Kale's calm guidance and patience had shown them that kindness could protect even in a harsh, frozen world. In that quiet moment, Kale felt a deep sense of pride. The bond they had built was strong enough to face the unknown, and together, they would continue to explore, learn, and grow. For the tiny dragon twins, the world was beginning to feel less frightening, and for Kale, the joy of their trust was more rewarding than any discovery he had ever made. The challenges of the outside world remained, but with warmth, patience, and gentle guidance, the twins were ready to meet them. And together they would face whatever came next. The valley was quiet, blanketed in soft snow under the twin suns. Kale had spent weeks caring for the tiny dragon twins, and now their scales shone brightly in the morning light. The twins were no longer timid or fearful. They moved with confidence, exploring the area around the shelter, testing their wings and chirping softly to each other. Kale watched them with pride, knowing how far they had come from the shivering, frightened creatures he had first discovered. That morning, Kale spread his coat wide, letting the twins snuggle against him before the day began. The larger twin nudged his chest gently, a small, affectionate gesture. The smaller twin pressed against its sibling but peeked up at Kale, chirping softly. He smiled, stroking their tiny heads. "Good morning, little ones. Today we have a new adventure." Kale had prepared a small area beyond the shelter for them to explore safely. He had cleared the snow, laid soft fabrics, and placed small rocks and objects for the twins to climb and investigate. The twins approached cautiously at first, wings twitching in excitement. The larger one led the way, the smaller one following closely. Kale followed, letting them explore freely while staying close enough to guide and protect them. The twins discovered new things with each step, shiny ice crystals, small footprints of animals and patches of sunlight that reflected like tiny stars on the snow. They chirped and nudged each other, learning from each other and from Kale's gentle guidance. Each moment of play and exploration strengthened their bond, not only with Kale but with each other. By midday, Kale decided it was time to introduce them to the nearby settlement. He had carefully explained to the humans that the twins were small and fragile, and that they needed patience and kindness. As Kale led the dragons toward the settlement, the twins stayed close, watching the unfamiliar humans with curiosity. The settlers were amazed. They had heard of dragons before, but they had never seen such tiny, vulnerable ones cared for with so much tenderness. Children from the settlement approached slowly, holding out small gifts, soft fabrics, tiny toys, and gentle touches. The twins flinched at first, but Kale knelt beside them, speaking softly. "It's okay. They're your friends," he whispered. Gradually, the twins allowed the children to place the gifts near them. The larger twin sniffed a small bundle of soft cloth and curled around it protectively. The smaller twin followed suit, touching the gifts lightly with its tiny nose. The humans watched in awe, realizing that trust had been built not through power, but through care and patience. Kale smiled quietly. "You see," he said softly, "kindness can change even the smallest hearts, and the biggest too." The twins chirped in response as if agreeing. Over the next days, Kale and the twins established a daily routine. Mornings were for exploration and learning, afternoons for play and rest, and evenings for warmth and quiet bonding. The twins' confidence grew. They practiced flapping their wings, climbing rocks, and interacting with the humans around them. Kale guided them gently, never forcing them, letting each small success build their strength and trust. One afternoon, the larger twin climbed a small hill and flapped its wings to lift slightly above the snow. The smaller twin followed, wobbling but determined. Kale cheered softly. "You're doing it. Look at you." The twins chirped excitedly, their tiny bodies brimming with energy. They had learned not only to trust Kale but to explore the world with courage. As the days passed, the settlement began to adapt to having the dragons nearby. Humans and dragons coexisted peacefully. The twins learned the boundaries of the world safely, while the humans learned to treat the creatures with respect and patience. Kale watched with quiet pride as the twins grew stronger, braver, and more playful each day. At night, Kale would spread his coat wide, letting the twins curl against him. Their tiny bodies radiated warmth, and Kale stroked their heads softly, whispering words of comfort and pride. The twins pressed close, no longer shivering, no longer fearful. They had found safety, warmth, and love. One evening, as the suns dipped low, the twins nestled together beneath Kale's coat, their eyes closing peacefully. Kale looked around the shelter and settlement, realizing how much had changed. What had started as a frozen discovery had become a small, thriving community built on care, trust, and kindness. The twins were no longer homeless. They had a home, a protector, and friends who understood the value of gentleness. Kale smiled softly. "You're family now," he whispered. "We'll face the world together." The twins chirped softly, tiny sounds filled with trust and happiness. They pressed closer, curling into his warmth as the stars began to appear in the sky above the valley. The story of the tiny dragon twins spread quietly through the settlement and neighboring regions. People were inspired, learning that even the smallest acts of care could build lasting bonds. The dragons had taught the humans patience, trust, and the importance of kindness. And Kale had learned that family was not just about blood, it was about love, safety, and shared warmth. Over time, the twins grew stronger, their wings more powerful, their eyes brighter, and their trust in Kale unwavering. They explored further, learning to navigate the valley safely. Each day brought new discoveries and challenges, but with Kale by their side, they faced the world with confidence. In the quiet moments, as the wind whispered across the snow, Kale held the twins close and felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Together they had built something extraordinary: a home, a bond, and a family. Compassion had transformed fear into trust, weakness into strength, and loneliness into love. And so, in the frozen valley under the twin suns, a human and two tiny dragons discovered the true meaning of family. It was not built on power, fear, or force. It was built on warmth, patience, and gentle care. A family built from compassion, ready to face the world together.